Hey, welcome. We are here with State Representative Heather Keeler, and wow, we're really excited to talk about Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you so much, Heather. We have a lot of information, and it'll be really fun for everyone to listen and learn. Thanks again, Heather.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really exciting. I always love Native Roots Radio and having the opportunity to just share the message that we're doing here in Minnesota. And one of the coolest things is this year, we are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day for the first time as a state recognized holiday. The really cool part about that is I kind of tell everybody that things start grassroots a lot, especially in Indigenous communities. And as a representative, I serve District 4A, which is Moorhead. And as I've said in a lot of spaces before being a legislator, I was an Indian education liaison. And I had the chance to work with students that were grades 7 through 12 and had a lot of conversations with them. And one of the main things that always came up, and Robert, you and I talk about this a lot with your experience in education, is that we just don't see ourselves reflected in the school districts and the school systems, whether it's the individuals that are there, whether it's the artwork that's on the walls or the language that we see, or in the curriculum. And so when I was a liaison, a lot of our students would ask, why don't we do anything for Indigenous Peoples Day? Why don't we do anything school wide? And so, as liaisons, it's our job to listen to the community and advocate to the higher administrators of the school districts for things like that. And so we did that. And unfortunately, we were told that we couldn't do any Indigenous celebration until it was a city or state recognized holiday.
Hmm.
And so at the same time, I was getting my master's degree in educational leadership, and I was doing conversations in the community asking, what is the barrier to academic success outside of academic rigor? And so it was interesting because, Robert, I wasn't asking people, are you good at math, or like, what's science hard, and the number one thing that rose to the top in that study was lack of representation. And a lot of people really said, we want to learn more about the Indigenous community. We know and respect the land we're on. We've been talking about land acknowledgements for a while now, but how do we learn more? And so we started to advocate for that. And if you want to put up a picture, the coolest part is that I did this with my son at a city level. He was, in a middle school at the time. And so he showed up in city council with me and really advocated for why it was important from his perspective as a student to honor and recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, at least in our community of Moorhead. And so we were able to do that. And it was one of the things then that other school districts around the state and other Indian education programs would say, well, how do we do that in our community? We want to be able to do that in our school district. We want, all of our students to learn and love and understand the Indigenous community. And so we ended up really pushing it at a state level. And that's when we talk about representation really matters at these bigger spaces. Some of the things that kind of go along with that is, we have tribal state relations is something that we've really worked on. Minnesota sits on 100% of ceded treaty territory land, which means every plot of land in the state of Minnesota was exchanged, or stolen or taken, or however we want to have that conversation, in exchange for something, which is education, healthcare, and the right to hunt, fish, and gather on all of the land here. And so really just going back to educating about that, celebrating and lifting that stuff up. So we're excited. One of the things is that in the state of Minnesota, as we passed it as a state recognized holiday, if you are in school today, your school is required to do 1 hour of Indigenous education for all students, K through 12. Also, it would be nice to kind of get your student parent committees involved. And what are you doing in the community? I know in Moorhead, we have a powwow tonight. And we also have like a meal that our community gets to share in together. It's open to everybody. This is an idea in the day that really is open to everybody to involve and learn about the beauty of our culture.
Heather, I think you hit the nail on the head on a couple things. And me, being a former teacher, I believe that a lot of people really want to know about our past and our history and are really, really curious. And so it's really, like you said, we're taking one step at a time here and really letting our relatives, which is everybody, know about Native Americans and Indigenous Day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of things that came from the indigenous culture or the Native American culture. And, our government, our US government, the way it's set up is reflected on how our tribal leaders ran their communities and their tribes. And we don't really talk about that. We don't talk about a lot of the ways that caring generationally, caring for the land, the way that we had three sister gardens, which is very different than row farming right now. And so I think we could learn a lot, we could grow, we could be healthy communities if we just kind of understand, the way that we think holistically, the way that we have relationships with Mother Earth and our relatives around us. And so I think it is really a beautiful opportunity, because you're right. In my day job, I do a lot of education around Indigenous history, and a lot of people just have no clue. They were never taught about boarding schools. They were never taught about murdered and missing Indigenous women. They weren't talked about the treaties, like really what are the treaties and what is that obligation? And that's in our US Constitution. And are we talking about that? I also think it's important for education systems to know that Indigenous history is not just history. We're still here. We're thriving. We're growing. I mean, you can look at our Minnesota legislature. We have, a precedent amount of Native Americans that are serving. We have the lieutenant governor is an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe in our state. And so those are things that prove that we're still here and we're still very much showing up in these spaces. And so I think we're not just in your social studies classes. We're not just in your history classes. I mean, I always say, why aren't we talking about us in PE? Lacrosse is something that really stemmed from our culture to begin with, or science, how we heat our homes, and the relationship with water and different things like that. It's just very much bigger than just social studies.
Right. I think one of the points too that you make, Heather, is that we're really into supporting the community and learning about us. I like to bring up the fact that, when I was 17 years old is when Native Americans could first practice their own religion. And so when people hear that, they really are dumbfounded. And it's great that we have, again, inch by inch, this day and education happening.
Yep. Yep. It takes a little bit, right, at a time. And I say every time that for us to like dissemble hate, we really have to educate, because we have to know better before we can do better. So thank you for the opportunity to share this with all of you. Continue to educate, reach out. There's all kinds of things happening border to border in Minnesota this year. And if nothing's happening in your community this year, start to engage and make sure something happens in your community next year.
Wow. Thank you so much, State Representative Heather Keeler. Really informal. Have a great Indigenous Peoples Day. And Peeny Gigi, thank you so much for all the work that you've done.
Sounds great. See you later.